Kit shouldered the leather bag, felt the files of Halo shifting under her jacket, and asked herself how she'd gotten into this mess in the first place. Her, just a small-time subway busker crooning for space. Sure, the subway wasn't the most pleasant-smelling part of New Capenna, not by a long shot, but the gig made her a living. People bustled up and down those worn marble stairwells as though the trains inhaled them in and exhaled them out in waves. Kit had picked the most acoustic corner of Lower Bessemer Station this morning, her back to the iron balusters. Before she started, she always gave herself a few minutes of listening to pick up the mood of the moment. The tempo of the feet, the syncopated patter of talk, the languorous rumble as the trains slowed to a halt and then clickety-clacked their way onward. Ba-doom, ba-doom, ba-doo-doo-doom, ba-doo-doom, dee-dum, dee-boom, ba-doom. That's pretty rhythmic. Pigeons always settled in a row in the rafters, bright eyes turned to her. Even when no one threw her a coin, the pigeons gave her their rapt attention. She would start humming, then singing, riffing and harmonizing with the wash of sound. All the old tunes sounded better with the life of New Capenna as their rhythm section. There she had been, not a soul stopping to listen, to grace her voice and presence with a coin. So she'd launched into the pigeons' favorite, bird nest burquois. They'd all rustled excitedly, wings fluffing out as she rang her changes through the bridge, playing with a key change simply for the joy of laughing, her voice in flight. Why not? No one was paying her any mind. And then, just like in the flicks, a big, well-kempt man, Leonin, just like her, but 3 times her size, and donning a gorgeous, expensive jewel-toned coat that little old Kit had been jealous of the moment the fabric caught her eye. This bigwig had halted right in front of her. He'd watched her thoughtfully, his two-toned expression unreadable. Was he disgusted? Impressed? Bored? Was he tapping one sharply polished shoe just slightly in appreciation? Her nerves skittered, and for an instant Kit thought she would lose the beat and explode into frantic flight the way the birds did when they were startled. But she hung on. She had been through worse. She brought the melody through its final cadence and finished with a flourish. One last trill and brush of a hand skyward as she sang the final line. In our cozy little nest for 2. The pigeon scooted. The big man put a hand in his pocket, and she thought he was maybe even going to give her a real tip. Instead, he brought out a calling card, offering it to her as he looked her dead in the eyes. His gaze was molten amber, only an air flick of emotion in his lion's gaze. His voice held a gravelly authority. Seems to me like a sister like you needs a chance. Well, wasn't that what she was always telling herself? She accepted the card with a polite purr, wishing it were cold hard cash instead, until she glanced at the ornate writing that inscribed a single name, Jetmir. Boss Jetmir, Kit exclaimed, shocked into losing her cool. The same, he said with a lazy affability that did not fool her one bit. The boss of the cabaret wasn't anyone's friend, but he changed lives, one way or the other. The warm-up slot at the Red Room tonight is yours, little songstress. If you complete one tiny favor for me, do you want it? The Red Room at the Fantolioni, she did want it. So that was how she found herself on a Cloud Pond Bridge train for the first time in her entire sorry life. Holding tight to the messenger bag he'd given her, it had held an illegal stash of Halo for delivery to a cabaret agent up on Park Heights. But she transferred all the vials into the inner pocket soon into her jacket so they wouldn't get jostled out as much. Most importantly, the bag contained a gown, wrapped in tissue paper, for her debut. A songstress needs the right look, Jetmir had said. She slipped her hand under the flap to fondle the cool silk, the most expensive fabric she'd ever touched. That satiny smoothness was the texture of success. She just knew it. She had used the ticket he'd gave her, a ticket she could never have afforded herself, and transferred at Upper Bessemer Station to a third-class train bound for the glories of Park Heights. The train started rattling up along the lowest tier of Cloud Pond Bridge, the busy levels of the metro beneath her feet, and the glamour of Park Heights awaiting her above like a sliver of heaven. She checked the clock set over the door that connected to the rear compartment and smiled with satisfaction. She had plenty of time to make the delivery on the Heights and get back to the metro before the performance. For once, she wouldn't look like a smudged and unwashed street cat whose rag pile scraps were held together with bent pins and discarded bootlaces. She'd look like the star she knew she could be, all shimmering green with gold highlights as the faces of the audience turned up to her in adoration. All her life, she dreamed of getting out of the blasted furnace of Caldaya, away from streets lit day and night by smoky lanterns because sunlight never reached the murky industrial depths. Jetmir was right, she just needed a chance, and the big man had handed her one. That was how the cabaret worked. Once you were in the family, you were in. Standing close to the front of the packed car, Kit swayed and jostled amid wide-eyed vampires, prim-faced elves, a leering devil accompanied by a trio of straight-laced and well-groomed Leonin, dressed in maid uniforms, and a pack of sweaty ogres headed for some muscle job among the wealthy. Laborers who worked up in Park Heights had to be clean and neat, but even so, this was a crowded third-class train. The pungent smell of those bodies were enough to make her fur prickle. There was a single seat open, but no one was sitting there because an unknown individual had left behind a puddle of glistening goo. By its bluish color, the culprit was probably a cephalid. Cabaret family didn't travel on third-class trains that had to share the rails with heavy freight loads. Family got seats on the second-class trains that ran on the tier above, or if they were big enough in the family, in the first-class luxury trains that ran like fat golden centipedes along the graceful top deck of Cloud Pond Bridge. Kit would sit in the first-class train someday. She'd look out over the horizon over the glittering city, bear just a small sliver of fang at her polished window reflection. And the whole sky would be hers. She just had to make her mark. What songs would you pick? 4, Jetmir had said, her lucky number. First a swinging, saucy beat like Wiggle Waggle Boom, as she sashayed to the stage in the gown that would make her as the real thing, a crooner to catch the eye, a tasty treat to titillate their interest. She had followed that up with a big brassy number to showcase her range. Be an angel and lift me up on your wings would do the trick. The pigeons loved that one almost as much as they loved Bird Nest Percuse, which would be the perfect sweet romantic ballad for the third number. A little soppy and just the right amount of low-rent folks who never wore a dirty shoe or scrounged dinner out for a garbage bin in their lives. And for a lasting impression on the fourth, a real showstopper. With a jolt, the train stopped dead. It lurched forward with a wheeze, halted again, and gave a drawn-out hiss. The people around her fell silent on the same way. All breaths held. When the train didn't start up and no announcement was broadcast, a murmur of anxiety traveled through the crowd. One belligerent rock pounded at the doors, which didn't open because the train was stopped between stations. There was nothing but track and service railings between them and the drop to Caldaya. By now, the train was perched above the main level of the metro. The tinted windows looked over a twilight marked by lights atop the metro's many girders and rooftops, and by the straight lines of the huge pillars that held up the city. Rising out of the smoky Caldaya all the way to Park Heights, nearer the track, the ubiquitous and sparkling pigeon nets, woven from stick and thread, gleamed with a tincture of halo. Here and there the dull red glow of Caldaya was visible through holes and cracks in the multi-level tier of the metro. It was a long way down into that pit. Kit refused to go back. She had to make this chance work, move up in the plane, be the star she knew she could be. But this third-rate train sat dead on the tracks, and she was stuck, along with all the other passengers how soon would mechanics get here? Through the window nearest her, she could just get a glimpse up and down the line along the wire maintenance walk, but there was no movement, no one coming to check on them. Could they bring up another train on the rails alongside? Would the passengers have to trudge on the emergency wall, back down to Bessemer and then get a new train back up? How much time would that take? Kit checked the clock above the connecting door at the front of the car. Even with all of the noise in the car, she could hear the second hand's doom-laden tick, tick, tick. Each passing second a tiny slow dance of a cut against her skin. Her one big chance. No, she wouldn't give up. With a flash of teeth and a press of shoulder, she wedged her way closer to one of the windows, trying to squeeze past the devil. If she could open the window up, she could climb out and ascend along the maintenance walk. She had trudged farther distances in her life. "Scram, alley cat," the devil hissed. The three mates all in a row curled back their lips to show their fangs at her. But Kit flexed her shoulders and fluffed herself bigger. She clawed through tougher meat than them. Their ears went down. The devil elbowed her hard. "I said, back off." The blow caught the back instead of her ribs, the pressure sinking into the precious gown inside with a rustle of crushed tissue paper. "Mind your own potatoes," Kit snarled. The devil's leer wasn't belligerent, so much as bravado by the way he stepped back with a startled gasp. Thinking his horns and ugly face were enough to intimidate her? Not likely. Thank the angels she'd moved the vials of Halo to her jacket, out of harm's way, but even as the pressure released, the rustling grew so loud that others began to notice and turn. Boom! A heavy crash shook the trails. All conversation ceased, then burst into crescendo as everyone spoke at once. What was that? A collision? Fireworks? Kit didn't have time for this. A second sharper boom blasted louder, bigger, shaking the whole train. The explosion's bang shocked the ears, followed by the woof of air, like the plane's biggest pipe organ that spattered flak of grit against the windows. Pigeon nesting along the nearest beams took flight in the burst of wings. The birds weren't the only ones startled. The crowd at the rear end of the car closest to the noise panicked, pushing and shoving toward the front, where more people were already crammed teeth to muzzle, horn to chin. Kit didn't have a pole or bench to hold onto, not even a windowed wall to press herself up against, so the surging flood forced her forward, and she barely kept to her feet as a besuited ogre stumbled against her. Iron footfalls thudded from beyond the closed door like doom approaching. The door into the rear compartment screeched, torn aside by a powerful arm wielding a wrench the length of a crowbar. A big muscle-bound Fiaschino, wearing the coal cap of the riveteers, ducked through the door and halted, looming over the now terrified passengers. Her stare kindled with inner fire, her scaly muzzle with literal fire. The devils lost his leer and huddled behind his mates. "That's a boiler," the devil muttered. One of his mates hushed him before the riveteer heard the rude nickname and took offense. The Fiaschino slapped a big wrench against the meaty palm. Her slow, deliberate, fire-licked words were punctuated by smacks of the wrench. "I'm just letting all of you fine eggs know that if you don't want to be broken today, you'll pay attention. You have been delayed because my crew is under orders to dismantle the rails before and behind this train. As you know, we use only the most sophisticated engineering methods." Another explosion sounded. Dynamite. The knobs up in Park Heights were going to be furious when their freight and their servants both didn't arrive in a timely manner. What was worth it to the riveteers to go hard like this? Bam! Went the big Fiaschino's wrench against her palm. Every gaze was gripped by the sound. Now, we could hurry along this process with a little help from a lucky volunteer. Bam! But not a soul stepped up. I know who you are and what you has done. So don't think you'll be getting away easy. Green fire licked the air as the Fiaschino roared the next words, pointing with the wrench toward the quivering, frightened passengers. Even the ogres looked ready to wet their trousers. "This is why you don't cross the riveteers." Like anyone needed a reminder of that. Kit kept her muscle mashed tight. This was not the time to be a witty Wanda. Someone not paying their debts to the riveteers wasn't her problem. Not that she wanted to find out whose problem it was. She tucked her tush, wedged the boot in between her other feet, and slid a half step away from the fire-spitting riveteer. The Fiaschino was as big, bold, breasty as a dame if she'd ever seen one. A real torpedo. Better to get out of range, if she could, and figure out how to get on her way instead of getting stuck in some janky business. "Now then," roared the riveteer as she peered across the crowd with a too keen eye, like she already knew what she was looking for. Her red-rimmed gaze halted on the three mates all in a row. "There's something our old pal Hansi owes us, and he knows it, even if he don't want to admit it." Hansi, a sick hairball of an idea caught in Kit's throat. Hansi. She closed her arms tight over her jacket, clutching the bag closer against her. Smack went the wrench against the palm. The passengers closest to the Fiaschino all flinched, but there was nowhere to retreat. A second Fiaschino appeared in the compartment door, not quite as big, so probably a male, carrying a hammer. The car went as quiet as a church mouse just before the owl swallows it up. The first Fiaschino showed all her teeth, and they were very white and strong and pointed. "There's how it is, my good ex. We got word that our old pal Hansi intercepted some of our goods and passed them on to a Leonin lass for transport. You hear that, my pearlful petite? You can show yourself now. Hand over the parcel and we'll let you go on your way as light as a pleased pig after the wallow party is over. How about it, doll? We riveteers don't begrudge a gold digger her shuffle, but this isn't the heap that's yours to keep. So be a wise egg, and there will be no more trouble." In the cramped train car, Volk swiveled to look at the three Leonin maids as Kit hunched her shoulders to make herself less conspicuous. She had managed to edge away from the devil and was now cramped between the vampires behind and the knees of a shocked-looking human in shopkeeper's garb, seated on the bench with her back to the window. Everyone was still looking toward the Fiaschino or at the maids, although the vampire was starting to sniff as if they had caught the scent of Caldaya ash around Kit. The vial shifted beneath her arm in the padded pocket sewn into her old jacket, because sometimes a girl had to transport bits and bobs of illicit cargo to make her rent. It would be so easy to step forward, confess, hand over the vials, and skedaddle on her way. If the riveteers let her go, no guarantees on that, were there? And then she'd have to deal with the cabaretti, maybe even with Jetmir himself. When she remembered his amber eyes and his confident way of taking up space, she knew the question he'd ask wouldn't be nice ones. With a boss like that, disappointment could kill. And if it was just her life, well, that was one thing. She had a career at stake. Even if no one laid a blade to her flesh, Kit's chance at the shining spotlight she deserved would be over. Her career in ruins. Sure, she could keep singing for the pigeons in Subway Station, with a coin or two thrown at her, but what kind of life was that for a Leonin with pride? Anyway, come to think of it, she had a lot more confidence in her ability to outmaneuver a big lunk of Fiaschino and her riveteer friends than to double-cross the canny cabaretti and the Jetmir, who had seen what she could be. Musicians had to be as fast on their melodic feet as any fleet-footed Park Heights messenger winging from one spire to the next. So Kit made up her mind right there. There? You're a Leonin, whispered the vampire as if it had taken this long for their sluggish thoughts to register Kit's presence. With a hard twitch of her hips, she slammed the vampire sideways, knocking them into a pair of ogres, then stomped onto the heel of the shopkeeper. The human shrieked in pain, buckled over, which allowed Kit to grab their shoulders and heave them off the bench head first into the vampire, who smacked the ogres again. With a roar, the ogres forgot to threaten Fiaschino and puffed up with grunts and oaths, cursing the vampire. People began to push and shove and shout as they fought to get away from the altercation. Kit jumped up into the bench and, with a heave of her shoulders and a burst of adrenaline, popped open the window. "There she goes," bellowed the thunderous baritone. No time to figure out who was pointing the finger. Kit jumped out of the window, an easy enough caper for a gal with plenty of practice squeezing out of sticky situations. As she landed soft-balled on the tracks, she looked up and down, gouching her best route. Running back toward Bessemer would take her straight into her pursuers. But when she turned her head up, she saw a mob of mechanics swarming the train that had been running half a mile ahead. The enthusiastic riveteers were literally dismantling the train's cars, glimmering outer shell like ants stripping the exoskeleton from a giant beetle. Wowzers, they really wanted this Halo, and they're stuck in the middle of their ruthless schemes. Well, either you swam or you sank, and this cat was not going to drown today. What route was left? The upper tiers of the bridge were too far to jump, and she couldn't fly. That left the Meccio's rooftops and the beams and pipes with so many roosting pigeons waiting the proceedings with attentive interest. There was a garden rooftop about 10 feet out and 15 down from the edge of the track, just within reach. Beyond it, she might be able to jump up and grab one of the beams, then run along its narrow span to the roof of the Merchants Guild Hall and shimmy down one of its pompous states and get into the Meccio that way. The train car door cracked open about 20 paces from her. The big Fiaschino leaped out onto the tracks with a solid thud she felt in her bones. That fiery gaze aimed straight at her. What's it going to be, doll? The easy way or the hard way? Buskers knew when to ignore catcalls, slipping one foot after another away from the brute. Kit warbled the opening of "Be an angel and lift me up on your wings" and caught a rustle of pigeon interested, hundreds of dark eyes turning her way. Birds were her first audience, and she'd learned there was a lot more to the pigeons of New Capenna than folk realized. How pigeons watched over her in exchange for the melodies they craved, warned her of trouble coming. Pigeons weren't mere featherbrains. The angels had left threads and twigs of power throughout the city's heights and depths, and people always overlooked the least flashy and most ubiquitous denizens of the levels. Even birds could be touched by Halo's uncanny powers. She jumped, tucking tight at first to get speed and then relaxing so she hit the rooftop into a boneless crouch, steady on her feet. But she hadn't taken one breath before the roof shuddered under the shocking weight of the Fiaschino, followed by a pair of smaller males. Who knew those clunks would be so nimble? Kit dashed forward to the far side of the roof. A fireworks splatter of dynamite went off among the beams, scattering the pigeons in a flurry of angry, frightened wings. Nests sprayed, torn into pieces, chaff fluttering downward with sparks and flashes of halo-touched glow. From the railings she saw a construction platform within leaping distance, this one braced above a half-finished roof. The three Fiaschino closed in behind her, spreading out so she couldn't bolt past them to the stairwell that would lead down into the building. No choice now. Kit climbed up on the railing and jumped again. It was farther down, the wind whistling past her ears and rippling against her fur. She hit the platform, tucked and rolled over her shoulder and back up to her feet to absorb the impact. Thoughts shook the platform as the three Fiaschino pursued. Kit raced to the edge of the platform, but there was no beam in reach, no craggy spire, no route to the roof of the guild hall. Just a long way down, through the gaps of the Meccio's buildings and levels into the dull red glow far below. Folk said cats always land on their feet, but this cat couldn't fly. If she leaped from this height, she'd be dead. Smack went the big wrench against the palm. Kit turned, back pressed up against the safety railing, back clutched to her chest. The big riveteer grinned as green fire licked ominously around her muzzle. "You can't outwit old Agnes, kitten. An engineer like me plans for every trick in the book. You hear the snap of my trap? Now hand over the goods, this is your last chance, cause I'm on a strict timetable today." And it was her last chance. Kit wasn't going to go back to Galdaya, not today, not ever. Ognis and her cronies might be engineers, but Kit had a lot of practice landing on her feet when the fall looked awfully grim. Big words, parakeet, Kit said, meeting Ognis right in the very gaze. Better make sure you don't cook your own eggs. She inhaled and sang right into the startled faces, jumping straight to the second verse, yanking herself away from the licking fire from the Fiaschino like she was taking a turn on that cabaret stage. Be an angel and lift me up on your wings. Remind me how your love brings me all the way to heaven above. Poised at the edge, the Mecchio endured the old Galdaya far below. Kit broke off and held the bag out beyond the railing. Oh, it hurt to do it, but she had no choice. She met Ognis's gaze with a steely one of her own. You want it, boiler? Then you can go get it. Opening her hand, she let go of the bag. Ognis's mouth dropped open and the fairy dame full-on snorted with astonishment and disbelief. But Kit didn't wait for the riveteers to get their ganders back in gear. She clambered up the railing, paused there balanced for an instant, because that was all she had, as she launched back into the song again. Be an angel, she crooned. She flung out her arms. She jumped into the vast, empty gulf of air, still singing. And the pigeons flocked, they swarmed, they massed together to make a big cloud of grey-white feathers. They caught her amid their hundreds of glittering wings and lifted her up and up and up, all the way to the lowest rim of Park Heights, to a little rim-ward parked lot where a vampire attendant was dozing in a chair overlooking a squad of fancy cars. The squawks and chirps of the flock startled the vampire awake, blinking through sluggish eyes as Kit stumbled onto the solid decking and got her bearings with a whistle of fangs. The bird spun skyward and scattered. She caught the railing and looked over the edge. She'd never been up so high, and for a moment she wondered if she had time to double back down into the Mecchio or even Galdaya to look for that bag. That beautiful high-class gown. One close call was enough. Too bad she wouldn't be there to see the Fiaschino's faces when they discovered they had been had. A clock chimed, then told the hour with a brassy bing bang, bing bang, bing bang. She had only 1 hour to go. She had to find Hansi, make the drop, and get back down the Mecchio, all without being spotted by any more raving riveteers. Said the vampire attendant, who clearly hadn't absorbed enough halo or blood recently. What's it? Stop there, miscreant. No time for a coast, Kit cried, and bolted out past the parking lot's gate. Jetmere had given her a map of Park Heights along with the bag. He was fair like that. Even if he'd tossed her straight into the boiling pot either to test her or because he didn't want to sacrifice one of his trusted lieutenants, well, she'd show him what she was made of. The fancy folk of Park Heights and their sober-looking servants did look twice at a scruffy street cat making tracks through the broad boulevards. She didn't have time to sightsee, gape, or goggle at the swanky storefronts. The glamorous gowns and shapely gams, elegant edifices and magnificent plazas were right from the sun touched the faces of those fortunate enough to live at the top of the heap. No, she'd have time for that later, when she was a crowning jewel. The stained glass and beetle shell sugar candy shop sat 2 blocks away from the Caspont Bridge station, a place where folk from the Mecchio could buy pretty twizzle sticks and halo-infused lollipops for the long workday, and where the adventurous among the Park Heights set could try out the bittersweet horehound candy drops that Galdaya's overworked mothers used to cut the sting of hunger in their babies' bellies. She sashayed in to find a customer browsing a rack of taffy. A short devil was seated behind the counter, a peppermint whip of a man. He had slicked back pomaded hair to match his horns, a nose that had been broken once too often, and a jeweler's glass in place of his right eye. I'm looking for Hansi, Kit said. The proprietor looked her up and down, but waited until the customer left and the bell on the door tinkled before saying curtly, Lost a bag, eh, kitten? I have what you want. One by one, with a flourish, She set out the vials, counted them out loud, and took a step back, waiting. "I'll be a clam's uncle," Nancy cocked his head as an expression of respect settled onto his thin face. "Didn't think I'd make it, do you?" Kit said, flashing a bit of fang. "You got a ticket for me?" He regarded her for a moment more, then nodded, pulled a stub of printed cardboard out of his suit pocket and slid it across the counter. She snatched it up. "I hope you don't mind if I don't hang around and chew the breeze. If I've got a stage to catch. And a fancy emerald gown to dazzle him in, if I don't mistake," he said with a curious look at her empty arms. She didn't think about that, couldn't think about that, as she ran to the station. Pigeons flew overhead like scouts, and she kept her eyes peeled for any sign of riveteers. At the station, a pair of glowering, gold-wrapped Fiaschino, not a torpedo or a gang, lurked by the main entrance. A flock of pigeons circled down in a squawking mass as if some do-gooder had scattered birdseed at the feet of the riveteer lookouts. While the pair flapped their wings to cover their heads and cursed like thunder, Kit scurried past, head down, and caught the next train just as the door shut. The tracks clicked and clacked in their spry rhythm, a beat to soothe the agitated soul. The gown was gone, sure, but she still had her voice and her performance to make her mark. And wasn't that what caught Jedmir's eye the first time? Sure, the voice inside her purred that she couldn't show up looking like a stray to a high-class shanding, but it's all flash up here. You gotta have both to succeed, kitten. Jacket flapping, Kit raced from Metzio station, slipping and sliding and elbowing her way through the crowds on the after-work streets. Rich scents spilled from restaurants, welcoming folk in their evening appetizers. Clerks and barristers laughed too obviously over drinks at fashionable bars. She had no watch, no way to know the time, and no time to detour to one of the clock pillars set in the squares. She just ran and panted up the backstage door of the Ventolioni just as it opened and the stolid doorman in cabaret collars stepped out. "Are you the singer?" He looked her up and down with a skeptical grimace. "Not the dots I imagined, but you are just in time. 6 minutes to showtime." 6 minutes? Kit gave the man her best cheeky grin because he seemed a friendly sort, or at least one who wouldn't judge until he had to touch you out the door. "Can you put a word in the ear of the conductor? My song list." "Sure, kitten." "It's Kit, if you please," she said with dignity. "Kit Canto. Begin as you mean to go on." And she meant to go on. As Kit entered the back passage, a beautiful elf in a dark red gown came gliding up like shining across a pool of oil. Her perfect features curled into a sneer as she, too, looked Kit up and down. "You aren't what Jedmir gave me to expect. I have a certain standard for my stage. He assured me you will have the right kind of look for the Red Room. Isn't there a gown?" Kit squared her shoulders and gave a confident twitch of her ears. "I have my act all sorted out. It's sure to be a hit with this fancy crowd. Is there a dressing room, ma'am? What may I call you?" Red Gown's frown was smooth and icy. "We'll do introductions later, since you're late. Had a spot of trouble, but it all worked out. Did you now? Jedmir and I had a wager on whether you would make it this way." The elf led her down a hallway. Spikes of laughter and the roar of excitable talk rumbled from the front of the house, where plenty of people were waiting for the show to start. 5 minutes to showtime and then 2 minutes of introduction. That's all the time you have to get fit for performing," said the elf with a condescending lift of an eyebrow, clearly doubting Kit would ever be fit for the Red Room stage. The tiny bells tied to the elf's braid tinkled musically, and Kit hummed a little descent, which made the elf glance back in surprise before shutting the door. The dressing room was plush enough for an opening act, with a sofa, a makeup table and mirror, and a screen for dressing. It was all small but way fancier than her little hole of a room tucked into an abandoned warehouse down in the Caldaya. Bright lights burned on either side of a big mirror. Her reflection stared back. She was filthy and sweaty, and her jacket had a rip in the hem she hadn't noticed. Not to mention its mended elbows and feathers stuck in her fur. No use crying over spilled milk. Descending Crosspond Bridge, she decided there was only one option left. Be who she was and make it sing. While doing a hasty batch of vocal exercises to warm up her voice, she ditched the jacket, unbuttoned the top 2 buttons of the old Salvador shirt she wore, brushed off the feathers, tidied up her style, and smudged the grime on her face to give it a more theatrical look, like she was an actress playing a street cat. After a second thought, she picked up a jauntiest feather, one with a bit of halo glow, and stuck it in one of the buttonholes. A knock rapped on the door. It cracked open. Redgown peered in and spoke with the precise diction of an individual very angry at having to deal with the trash that was washed up on their doorstep. "You're on, Miss Canto." Kit followed the elf of the wings of the stage. A faint rustling met her ears. When she looked up, she saw pigeons, so many pigeons, gathered up on the rafters up in the darkness. How had they gotten in? The same way she had, on a wing and a gamble. "And now, for your pleasure, Miss Kit Canto." Kit put on her best street attitude as the band struck up the opening bars of Wiggle Waggle Boom. The house lights had been turned down, but she had a cat's ability to see in the dark, and darned if there weren't riveteers in the crowd. Even that torpedo of a Fiaschino lass. Bless her fairy stars. Was it Kit's imagination, or did all Agnes' eyes glow with frustrated anger as she recognized the songstress strutting into center stage with a swagger? "Wiggle waggle boom, wiggle waggle boom, you think you got me but wiggle waggle boom." Kit punctuated each boom with a saucy waggle of her whips. Meh. The cabaret druids adored it. No love lost between them and the riveteers, after all. At the end of the song, the cabaret howled with laughter, and the riveteers scowled. Even the pigeons chirped, then fluffed up with pride as the band swung into Be an Angel, and after that settled with contentment for Birdnest Bercuse. For her final number, she changed her mind 6 times on the train from Park Heights down to the Met Show before she decided to pledge her loyalty and strike a blow for the cabaret at the same time. It was a gamble. If she lost, and she left here without a contract, even a street cat with her smarts wouldn't last long once the riveteers tracked her down, as they would unless she won. Oh yes, unless she won. The orchestra segued into an up-tempo twist on a classic melody Kit had specially requested on her set list. She knew how to change lyrics on the fly, and this tune was going out to all the riveteers in the crowd, but especially Agnes. "Pack those files one by one up to Park Heights. On the run, bye boiler," Kit crooned. How is that a song? Shifting into an exaggerated street gait, cocky and sure-eyed, twice the bravado of the devil on the train with the side of macho to top it off. She leaned into the heat of the spotlight, looking beyond the stage, beyond the font crowd, beyond even Jedmir in his gallery box seat, right to meet Agnes's furious gaze for a second time. Kit tossed her head back, puffed out her chest to really show off that feather, and belted the song to the Fiaschino's direction with her throatiest croon. A curled, triumphant grin to punctuate each line, just like the smack of the wrench of a certain pushy engineer climbing the tracks. "Now my dreams will come true as I bid goodbye to you, boiler, bye-bye." The final crescendo rolled through a drum cascade and her last note, pitch perfect, then a held breath, drawn out into a long hush. Above, the pigeons chirped excitedly, the sound abruptly drowned out by a roar of applause and even a few whistles. Kit took her bow and was about to leave the stage, shaking with exhaustion and relief, when the curtain at the wing stirred and the hulking figure moved lightly out onto the spotlight. Jedmir strolled out on stage, raising a hand that brought the theater to a complete can-hear-pin-drop silence. "Great voice, great spirit. What do you say, brothers and sisters?" Sustained applause and enthusiastic cheers filled the house, cut off when he again raised a hand. His gaze touched the elf standing just off the stage, and he nodded at his stage manager as with an unspoken message, then turned back to the auditorium. We'll see Miss Kento again tomorrow night, with a higher billing and a few more songs. He gave Kid a nod. Said to the band leader, how about an encore of Bird Nest Berceuse? And walked off the stage. For a moment she was voiceless, breathless, but no, she'd heard him right. She'd passed his test with flying colors. Cabaretti, here we come. She was in, no longer a street cat. Miss Kit Kento was now a high-class songbird singing at the richiest joints in town. No sky the limit. From the rafters above, the pigeons cooed.